Good evening. It's been about a week and a half since I did my last video. I've been working on some stuff, including more videos and the print edition of Line of Departure magazine. Yes, the next issue will exist. But in the meantime, I've been thinking as well, and thinking can be dangerous for some of us, but we do it anyway. And one of the things that I've been considering is the definition of a war game. Now, a lot of times people will think quite correctly that it's self-evident. It's a game that simulates a battle, campaign, or a war on a level between the individual soldier, or in science fiction context, an individual alien, all the way up to grand strategy involving countries, alliances, or again science fiction complete planets or solar systems. It's self-evident. It's a game about war. However, I've been thinking as well, based on some exchanges that I've had on social media, that it could go beyond that. I mean, we understand that strategy isn't just military. Eurogames are about strategy, but usually there isn't any conflict. Nobody, simulated or real, gets hurt. It's not about hurting people and breaking things and preventing it from happening to your side. We can have games about conflict that have nothing to do really with war, but they're conflict nonetheless. Now, a term that I have come to prefer for this is non-kinetic conflict. No bullets, no swords, no spears, no phasers. That I wouldn't call it peaceful. It can become very bitter. If you define peace as just the absence of fighting, physical fighting, then it's peaceful. But peace is more than that. It's not just the lack of war. It's not just the lack of armed conflict. Back in the Cold War, the communists sometimes referred to Eastern Europe as a peace zone. Well, peace as enforced by the Soviet military, with buckets of oppression from local communist parties and their secret police, I have a hard time looking at that as peace. We can also have peace as sometimes associated with the Assyrians, as it was said in the ancient world, they created a desert and called it peace. No. Now, peace is a little tougher to achieve. But you can have conflict that does not involve physical violence, simulated or otherwise. And I think one of the major areas that we can see in wargaming for this non-kinetic conflict is politics. Now, you have games on presidential elections. That certainly counts. You have games on diplomacy. That counts. Although diplomatic games can sometimes result in wars. One of my favorites is the old victory game, Pax Britannica, where one objective was to hold off the onset of World War I, but there was a very good chance that the players would end up fighting at least limited wars. And of course, there was always the certainty of colonial conflict against the people whom you were trying to bring into your colonial empire. So that wasn't strictly non-kinetic. There is a strong non-kinetic element to it. And I think it's a great simulation of the power school of diplomacy, or as it's sometimes termed today, maybe a little more accurately, as realism. And this is something that I do teach. Now, in terms of political games, that are non-kinetic but are conflict nonetheless. There are two fairly recent ones that I think are worth looking at. One is Votes for Women. It is a game on the struggle for female suffrage from 1848 to 1920. And one side takes the suffragists, and the other side takes those who believe in one penis, one vote. And they conflict over the extension of the franchise to women. That's conflict. It's basically non-kinetic. Unless you have a peaceful demonstration that gets beaten up on by the authorities, it's non-kinetic. It's strictly political. Another one I just purchased, and is from this year, is GMT's Cross Bronx Expressway. And yeah, the graffiti in the middle does say Bronx, even though it is almost impossible to read. If you want to know the name of the game, look at the spine. Now, GMT bills this as Irregular Conflicts. It's the third in their Irregular Conflict series. This is conflict. It says so right on the box, and it's between different factions that have different visions of what the borough of the Bronx should be. And this is a subject, too, that has interested me for years since I read The Power Broker by The Power Broker by Robert Caro. It was written long before he started his groundbreaking work, his multi-volume biography of Lyndon Baines Johnson. And in the Power Broker, he addresses Robert Moses, who could be argued was one of the greatest builders of all time in New York City and New York State specifically. State parks, bridges, highways, lots of highways, dams, more highways. But his vision was deeply flawed. He wanted to build a New York that was safe for the automobile, and people were secondary, and especially minorities and the poor. That he saw his vision as being one for the middle class and the upper class, as he saw himself, who drove. Irony of ironies, he never learned to drive, but he wanted to build a city and a state that was ideal for the automobile. He came in conflict with a lot of people. The only ones that could ever really stand up to him were Franklin Roosevelt when he became president, not when he was governor of New York, but when he was president, and then Nelson Rockefeller. He lasted really from Al Smith through Nelson Rockefeller for 45 years of being the power broker and the arbiter of projects in New York. Well, Cross Bronx Expressway goes into that subject. And what sort of Bronx is going to be built, or rebuilt, renewed, or destroyed? And believe me, Moses destroyed an awful lot. He destroyed neighborhoods. He destroyed people who crossed him, including his own brother. If people protested he wanted to put a highway through a rare patch of nature in New York City, well, guess what? Nature got bulldozed. So, yeah, this is conflict. It's irregular conflict, although I tend to think of irregular conflict in terms of irregular warfare, guerrilla warfare, terrorism, revolution, things like that. A strictly political context is non-kinetic. Until terrorism gets involved, until the authorities turn their guns on peaceful protesters or activists, think of Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland, it's non-kinetic. It's warfare, conflict waged through politics, the media, the courts, but not the battlefield. Not even a dirty war. So, I do consider this real war, just not the war of the battlefield, the war of the sword, the war of the gun. Especially not the war of artillery and nukes. But it's war nonetheless. And this separates it too from competition. Competition is more friendly. Competition usually has specific rules, umpires, referees. Baseball is a competition. Golf is a competition. Football is a competition. Now, some people have likened football, American football, not soccer, but American football to war. And the great coach of the Buffalo Bills, Marv Levy, took great exception to this. As a World War II veteran, he said, I was in a war. He didn't see combat. He was in the Army Support Services, not the ground forces. But he was very firm with the idea that he had seen war. He knew what it was. Football wasn't war. Football was a sport. Football was competition. But here we have politics being the field of battle, as it were. It's a lot more raw. The rules are sometimes indifferently enforced. There's a lot more dirty play, as we see with Robert Moses and his long career. And yeah, it's conflict, it's war. It's not a gentlemanly enterprise like, say, football. But it's war, and it can be simulated through a war game. So these are my thoughts for tonight. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe and like. And above all, tell your friends, share the video. This isn't meant to be done in silence and obscurity, but feel free to share it. Feel free to use it. And thank you for your time. And I will see you hopefully in a shorter time than another 10 days. And thank you very much.